Sports build champions and leaders, but every champion has moments of struggle, pressure, anxiety, burnout, and those moments deserve real support. PAX Health is proud to sponsor the New Jersey Lacrosse podcast because they believe mental health care should be available when you need it, as you need it. Therapy and psychiatric services for kids, teens, communities, and families. Telehealth and in-person appointments are available within 48 hours. PAX Health, people helping people. Visit pax.health. That's PAX.health. Lacrosse families, meet Orgo, the calendar app that actually thinks like a sports parent. Orgo syncs with team apps you already use and enriches schedules with real-world logistics. Every event shows travel times, early arrival buffers, carpool assignments, conflict alerts, and time-specific weather so you know what gear to pack. Get your athletes on it too. Orgo teaches time literacy, an executive skill for life. One subscription, whole family. Code LAX25 is 25% off. Just $44 locks in sanity for the whole year. Visit www.orgohq.com. That's www.orgohq.com. JAG Physical Therapy, providing rehabilitative recovery from sports and soft tissue injuries to knee, foot, ankle, hip, shoulder, elbow, and back injuries. Schedule your appointment with JAG Physical Therapy today and meet their experienced team of physical therapists, occupational therapists, athletic trainers, and exercise physiologists invested in your full recovery. Get back the life you love at JAG Physical Therapy, the most awarded physical therapy provider in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. For more information or to make an appointment, just visit jagpt.com. That's JAGPT.com. This is the New Jersey Lacrosse Podcast. I'm your host, Keith Block.
I'm Bill Farr.
I'm Anthony Terranova.
And this here is Gil Swenson. Welcome to the New Jersey Lacrosse Podcast.
Sponsorships, we're going to start needing a whole nother time slot for them. Keep them coming.
And welcome indeed to the New Jersey Lacrosse Podcast. And we are without Gil Swenson tonight. So you, for those of you watching on YouTube, you can see that Gil did indeed ditch us for this evening, but I am joined by my esteemed colleagues, Anthony Terranova and William Tharp. Boys, how are you doing?
Good. Happy Easter after a very, very crazy week of New Jersey high school lacrosse. A ton of upsets, ton of top-ranked teams going down. It was definitely quite the week so early in the season.
Tharpy, happy Easter.
Easter. Can I have the floor for just one moment, Keith, if you may?
You may.
You know, last week I sat here on this podcast and I went through a week of text messages and things said to me. I had graphics made of me laying in a grave with Nova and Gil standing above me, saying what a buffoon I was, how I know nothing, what an idiot. I've ruined the sanctity of the podcast. I believe the words that I have the Skyland Conference so far up my asshole I can't see straight. And here I stand, Keith. Much like my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, I raise out of the grave a changed man this week because I know ball. I asked you to change my title on here to certified ball knower, and you understandingly couldn't get it done. It was last minute. But here I stand. After the ridicule, the abuse I took, here I stand, a new man, vindicated by the light of the world, and I have been looking forward to this. I wish Gil was here because, man, that guy loves to make a graphic real quick on ChatGPT, but, man, I'm here, I am jacked up, and I feel alive.
Well, you are a self-proclaimed knower of balls, and prematurely perhaps are gloating, releasing your frustrations to the rest of the lacrosse community. So you can have your week to feel fantastic about this, and I'm very happy that you feel good about it.
You know, it's crazy the amount of people who I'm not related to. They come up to me and they say, Tharp, why are those guys so mean to you? They just pick on you. and I say it's the cross I bear. It's the cross I bear, and you know what? I'm here, and I took it. We had a pretty subdued episode last week. I think we didn't want to be too performative for Coach Maselli, but I just every day it just things were going my way, and things can change on a dime. I acknowledge that, but for one week, I just feel on top of the world.
Well, that's
And
wonderful.
again, I could come on here next week and just look like an utter buffoon, but for one week, man, I feel great.
I'm so happy for you. So happy for you. So what we're going to do, we're going to get started today. From time to time, I would imagine that there are things that I will see throughout officiating games in the high school area where I'll have a thought about something in one direction or the other, and I'll call that the opening face-off. So I do have a thought about something, and I think that I'd be interested in your guys' take on it from the coaching perspective, and certainly, Nova, I would love to know if you think this same way as an official sometimes. I officiated a game on Good Friday, which is odd for me to say because it's the first game that I can ever remember in a quarter of a century being played on Good Friday. And there were a couple this year, which was a little weird. And I won't say what teams it was, but it was a good team. It was certainly not a bad team. And I left the game thinking to myself that this is a good team that's going to beat a bunch of teams. And yet I think that how they feel or perceive about the level of contact that is acceptable before they start whining and complaining and bitching about things, or in my perception as an official, getting mad at the other team for what is, in my opinion, just an acceptable level of contact in a very good lacrosse game. And when I say that, I mean like stick checks and stuff, like a legal body check, a man ball check, or somebody that gets a really hard check on their hands. And in really high level games, in my experience, not only do the players not react to those things, like they don't get mad about them, they don't try to get exact revenge in a physical way against the other team. They simply just keep playing and then score goals. And there are other teams who I think fall into this other category of they play pretty good lacrosse, but then they allow the emotion of it to win the day and say like, oh, screw that kid. He didn't have to check me that hard with his stick. And then when you add into that, sometimes assistant coaches, and this is not, I'm not saying that as a veiled shot at you, Tharp, at all, but I believe from time to time you probably fall into this category where assistant coaches start chiming in on every little thing that just is a 0% foul in a good lacrosse game. And then the kids start to feed off of the assistants or the head coach in the like, see, they're doing bad stuff to us, we need to get back at them. And then ultimately, I think my point in this is a good lacrosse team is going to lose a game at the end of the season when more potentially experienced officials are just okay with that level of contact. So they're not going to call fouls on the first things. And then that good team is going to feel like they got wronged and they're going to do something one octave worse. And then they're going to get penalized and it could cost them a big game at the end of the season. That is my thought, my rant on the opening face-off. What do you guys think about that?
I think that is such true assessment on a lot of ways, but I think it's so broad, and there's definitely not just like one like instance or example or things like that. There's definitely a lot of different avenues, but I think there's just so much more that you're kind of talking about that this could go for we could have this conversation for almost a full episode. So I guess I'll just try to shorten up kind of like my thoughts and opinions on that as best as I can. Obviously, it's tough to also make sure that you're being super respectful to all the teams that you've been on games for, and I've been on games for, and everything else in between. So there definitely is some teams out there that think that nice check to the hands warrants something. where it doesn't. And they do anything they can. There's some teams that have to do that because they might not see the ball if they're playing a better team. And then sometimes there are teams that are better, and they'll do anything that they can to continue to get chippy. They'll feed from their coaches for sure. I think coaches play a huge, massive part in how players react to calls on the field. There's definitely some coaches that will fully embrace that, and that's kind of what the culture that they want to have happen. On the field. Then there's definitely games where they're getting different refs. There are some guys that want to control the game a lot more and make sure that the game doesn't get out of hand. Maybe even some experienced officials, and that's completely up to them and how they see a slash and want to protect the game and manage the game is completely fine. And then again, when you get an official like Keith Glock on your game, who's refed at the highest level possible. You don't see things necessarily the same way. What a good check is, what a good slash is, I guess the slash is not actually good, but you know what I mean. Isn't the same that the ref called it, 2 games ago when they were winning by 12 goals, and now they're just trying to control the game as much as possible. So I think there's a lot more that kind of goes into that conversation for sure. But I certainly have seen my fair share of whining what a nice hard check to the hands, is this year more so than normal. So I think it's a good assessment that you have so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as a very passionate coach who, we've had some really heart-to-heart conversations as a group, individually with each of you guys. Like, I think that's been a really big growth area for me is like, understanding, and I know we joked about it, right? But like, taking the ref test actually was, helpful. And, Keith, you, not to sound dramatic, you coming into my life and our life and like, getting to learn, things from other perspectives, I think, has been super helpful. I think, to Nova's point, sometimes it's a cultural thing. It's you know, teams just want to have that chip on the shoulder. I also think there is a part of it that's, super regional. Something that we've talked about in our group is, it seems like the teams from South Jersey tend to be a little tougher, a little more gritty, more resilient because um, that's who they are as humans and people. And they're a little more receptive to hard coaching and stuff. And as you travel up through the state, it might be a little different. I think the other piece of it too is like Nova kind of alluded to is, you know it can be frustrating as a coach. And we've had this conversation a million times when it's just the three of us. Like, sometimes the inconsistency, with what's a slash one game, what's not a slash the next game, does get to you sometimes as a coach. And but you got to learn to try and roll with the punches a little bit. And like you said, everyone's favorite saying is control what you can control.
Yep.
And if you're able to kind of do that as a team, and negotiate that as a coaching staff, and be able to kind of keep the temperature of your team a little more even keel, and understand you're competing against the opponent in the opposite color, not the guys in the black and white stripes. That's helped change my growth mindset. And if anyone's listening now who's similar to me, and you find yourself flying off the handle at the littlest thing, just understand that you're a role model for your players. You're a role model for anybody watching. And it's our job as coaches to try and stay even keel, and you know navigate those tough moments in the game.
I mean, yeah, expect consistency and talk with the scoreboard. So that's pretty much all I can say about that.
Yep. And I would say just the last sentence on this, because I can certainly understand as coaches when you get frustrated. This was something last game, it's not today. I don't know who was there as a ref in the last game, but I can tell you that I'm going to be as consistent as possible from quarter one to quarter four in this particular game. And then, each game has a little bit of a life of its own. So, I think within each game, there needs to be that element of consistency, and certainly understand that there's frustration among different games. But that's life. So anyway, we are 7 weeks, if you can believe this, into our New Jersey Lacrosse podcast season, and we are fully in the thick of the regular season, and what a week it was. We are going to look back at the week that was. We're going to look ahead to the week that's next. We'll take you through our top 20, go through the picks, and then, as always, we're going to end with our stall warning. So I want to look back first, boys. A game that I think is just worth a mention because I think it kicked off a week that, again, in the Bill Tharp Revenge Tour, was a first feather in his little cap over there. Bridgewater defeated Bernards 9-5, and we'll talk about Bridgewater a little bit later. But just as a note that game happened, and Bridgewater did pull off a pretty convincing win. Nova, first game I want to talk about in some detail. Some would say it was the biggest game of the week. It's certainly in the conversation. Del Barton 11, Don Bosco 10. A game that was pretty entertaining back and forth right up until the end.
Yeah, I mean, it was the battle number one for sure. Was a great game, kind of what you expect to see from those two heavy hitters. A lot of back and forth, and probably neither team going to be necessarily happy what they saw on film. Would be my guess. At the end of the day, the Barnes top players made more plays, and they only needed to make one more, and they certainly did that. I thought clearing needed to be cleaned up. On both teams, especially on Bosco's side, I feel like they cleaned up not the face off, the clears a little bit more and had a little bit more possession. It could have been a different game. I was surprised Bosco was doing a really good job on the face off after we praised how highly Dub Barnes' three guys were. Again, you can only have one on the field, but thought Bosco did a fantastic job navigating that and creating extra possessions, which a lot of teams aren't able to do on those guys. So it was a battle. I definitely, Bosco looked better than I thought they were, for sure. And Abaran, again, I have had them ranked number one since preseason. So they stay kind of exact where I thought that they were. I would, we need to find a little bit more consistent in cage from both teams, and I don't think both teams had stellar goalie play. I know the Barn made a little bit of switch, and they made some big saves there in the fourth quarter, but I think find a little bit more consistent there. But these two teams are certainly some of the best in the country, and they certainly are. St. Augustine will have something to say for sure, but definitely poised to see each other again at some point towards the end of the season.
And to just give some context to this game as it relates to the overall national scene, I had a chance to officiate St. Anthony's from Long Island against Episcopal Academy from Pennsylvania. Episcopal, just to give everybody the lineage of what came before, Episcopal defeated Lawrenceville to start the season, who was pretty much the consensus number one in the country at the time. And then in the game that I had, St. Anthony's came back from 3 goals down in the final 2 minutes to defeat Episcopal, and then Del Barton defeated St. Anthony's. So as we see kind of where our New Jersey teams are fitting into the national landscape, there is no doubt in my mind that all the teams that we have ranked near the top of our poll are exceptionally relevant in the national scene, whether that's public or private.
Absolutely.
And speaking of the public versus private, a great segue here, Tharp, as Seton Hall Prep and Westfield squared off, and it was Westfield who came out with an 11-10 victory over the defending non-public and Curse Cup champions.
Yeah, I think so if you're in the Seton Hall locker room after this game, I definitely think that you feel like you lost the game as opposed to Westfield won the game. It was a game that was 10-6, very deep into the third quarter, 10-7 going into the fourth. So Seton Hall doesn't score a goal in the fourth quarter. I think the overall thing is just the really sloppiness of it. A lot of unforced errors, guys trying to run through doubles or triple teams, passes getting knocked down. I just think that it was a brand of lacrosse that, Seton Hall that's not who they are. And watching the game, I think of, when Glock would joke with us, it'd be like, that's the play you try and draw up as a coach. And, watching Seton Hall try to execute some of those tight moments there, it's like, I know as a coach and knowing that coaching staff, that's not what they're trying to do out there. But it just seems like the moment got tight. And, Seton Hall does return a decent amount of contributors from last year, but there is a ton of new guys out there for them, so I think they're finding their footing. Um, but Westfield got the job done, and I think most impressively is that without Ryan Waldman, sounds like he's nursing an injury. I don't know how serious it's going to be if it's a super long term thing, but to beat Seton Hall without your bona fide superstar is impressive. I think the key of the game, is Westfield won some really timely faceoffs. They didn't win many of them, but they scored a goal off a faceoff, and then after Cooper Chimay scored to give them the lead with I think it was like a minute 19, something like that. They won the next faceoff and were able to kill about 30 to 40 seconds before they turned it over. So good job by them. I think, but both teams, as they evaluate their performance, probably want more out of their goaltending. Both teams were pretty comfortably below 50% in the net. So I think if you're Seton Hall, you walk away. There was a point. I think it was 6-6 at halftime. Offense really hit a really nice flow state there in the third. Canned some shots from distance, finished in tight. But at the end of the day, just you know, it felt like they just the moment got a little big for them, and we complimented Westfield on their early season schedule, and they were able to get the job done. So, and then Seton Hall has a pretty tight one with Caldwell on Saturday. So I think Seton Hall's going to be shaking off the cobwebs, a little bit here, and they go through this phase a little bit throughout the season. But all in all, Westfield, great job by them. Super gritty win. I think Ben Seward is one of the best LSMs in the state, and again, doing it without Waldman, just really impressive.
Next game that I think we all had an eye on, that certainly in the early going of this game we thought was a litmus test that Notre Dame was passing, as they played a very, very tough first maybe 15 or 16 minutes, I would say, against St. Augs before the Hermits pulled away and defeated Notre Dame 16-7. Nova, what did you see in that game?
Yeah, just touch briefly. Was definitely, Notre Dame is right there on the top 20, and still kind of is for us. We wanted to keep our eyes on this game, and we thought for a little bit that Notre Dame was going to at least keep it close, or get the job done with a slew of already ton of upsets this week. But they were ultimately the better team prevailed. They just dominated the second half in every aspect, offensively, defensively, winning faceoffs. It looked like the number two team playing a team right outside the top 20 right now.
Want to talk about a pair of Chatham games just to give some perspective on the first one. Then we don't need to talk about it too much, but it was a top 20 matchup. Chatham defeated Ramapo 15-5. I believe that was Chatham last week ranked number 6 in our poll and Ramapo number 17. But that was the kind of appetizer for Chatham on the week, as they then took on Ridgewood later in the week. And that one was a Ridgewood 11, Chatham 10 final. What do we see there, boys?
Fortunately, I didn't get to see the game. I would love to see this game, especially after Ridgewood got shellacked by Delbarn. wasn't even close. So we definitely didn't think they were going to be able to kind of keep up with this Chatham's offense. And you can never throw it back to the middle of the field. It's always room for disaster. That's how they got the game-winning goal. But impressive to Ridgewood. They came out of the way and got the job done. I did not see the game, so I can't really talk too much on other than that. But it was certainly probably the most shocking surprise of the week.
Yeah, I mean, just reading the NJ.com article, it sounded like the big thing was the Ridgewood goalie ended up with about 18 saves, and in the words of Mike Kinney, Chatham hit double-digit posts. So, but they won the game, then that's all that matters. I think we talk about sometimes, what's replicable, if these teams ever see each other again, and like Nova saw them up close in person against Rumson. That Chatham offense is electric, but anytime a goalie makes 18 saves, it's a recipe for an upset. And Ridgewood's getting some production from unknown guys. They had a sophomore Murphy finished with 4 goals, and they had a freshman. I apologize, I'm totally blanking on his name right now. Finished with 3 goals, so getting 7 goals out of 2 underclassmen. Impressive by them. But like Nova said, they were on the cusp of falling out after losing so handily to Del Barton. But Coach Pounds is gonna coach those guys up, and obviously being as great of a goalie he was, it's not shocking that goalie play is getting better for them. I will say, just looking at the stats, Chatham goalie only had 4 saves. I think he was single digit saves against Westfield as well. So pretty sub 50% there. So I think Chatham's got to try and figure out whatever it is in net. If there's a goalie competition, we don't know, but I'm sure Coach Scarpello is would love to. If you're at 50% even, you got to feel good about that offense.
Next up, the Nick Maselli train rolls on down the tracks as Scotch Plains Fanwood knocked off Rumson in overtime, 7-6. I know both of you had an eye on that game. Give us some insight.
What a great ending. The Scotch Plains is down 2 goals with 58 seconds left. They get they tied up, and then a tough take in overtime for Rumson leads to really nice. It looked like a set play from Scotch Plains off of X, and Scarpa for Scotch Plains canned it, and great win for them. I think it was kind of what we thought face-off wise. Scotch Plains dominated on face-offs. Um, I know Joseph Whitehouse had 4 goals for them. Leiden was held pretty well in check for them. So I was really impressed with Scotch Plains defense. Impressed with their goalie. Little things to correct there offensively. Again, some just little decision making things, but it was a great game. I think Rumson, right now they remain unranked, but I know both of us strongly considered ranking them. Just if you have a loss that competitive, you're going to be there at the end of the season. So, Nova, I don't know what else you saw.
Yeah, I mean, I still have Rumson in my poll ranked. I do think that is a very good team with pieces all over the field that are just going to continue to get better and are really testing themselves early in the season. So I have all the faith in them. I mean, Rumson dominated for most of this game until literally the last 5 minutes. So really couldn't win anyway. At the end of the day, you got to win the game to win the game. That's all that matters. Scotch Plains offense was a little bit sluggish. It felt slow, which I wasn't really expecting to see it, and it didn't really get too many eyes on them until then because they have so many great players. But it felt just like a lot of like picks and big long sweeps. It didn't feel like there was like the flow state as you so called. But I think if they gotta just get a little bit more, moving that ball a little bit quicker, getting that sticks out a little bit quicker, that that team could score a lot of goals. They got a ton of offensive talent, but I just thought it was a very I don't think they played to their potential against this Rumson team. But at the same time, though Rumson did let up 18 versus Chatham, who we are claiming is probably the best offense in the state. Rumson has some dudes that can stop guys for sure.
Try not to beat your chest a little too much over the next 4 minutes or so with these next two games, Tharp. You've already done it a little bit already, but William, I believe in Bridgewater Tharp, vindicated a little bit here as Bridgewater defeated Gill 8-6.
Yeah, I mean it's what I thought about Bridgewater. It's their I don't think that the Pinger game, Pinger makes you play in a way that's super uncomfortable. It was the first, an early game of the season for them. So, for them, winning this game was really impressive. Jackson Fuentes finished with 4 goals. Declan Cardillo with a handful. I thought the thing that I was most how do I want to word it? I was most disappointed. I thought Gill kind of packed it in at the end. They were doubling the ball and they were chasing and stuff, but there was kind of guys all over the field open, and it looked like they were kind of content to see it out. And I don't know if the thought is that we'll get him next time, we'll get him in counties or whatever, but um, you know Gill's 1-5 now. We acknowledge their gauntlet of non out of state games, but they beat Hillsborough, convincingly enough, I guess, and then lose to Bridgewater. So I think Gill's at a bit of a crossroads right now, kind of figuring it out. Obviously, they have that high end talent. Guys like Dante Lamb and Griffin O'Sullivan are still immensely talented. So they spoiler they stay in the top 20 just barely, but um, it was a really Interesting result. And at the end of the day, the other we didn't write it down, but Manasquan loses this week to Homedale, and again, Gil's not on here to eat some crow, but citing, Manasquan was 2-0 with two man wins, and they lose to Homedale, who you guys had said like, oh, Bridgewater didn't beat Homedale by as much. Well, Homedale's clearly better than everyone thought. So, yeah, I'm happy. I feel very vindicated for at least a week, and like I said, I wish Gil was on here to create a graphic of me rising out of the grave.
And rising out of the grave continues. Keep it short. Pingree 8, Bernard 7 in overtime.
Yeah, I mean, this was classic, gritty, ugly Pingree. This is what you're going to get out of them this year. Definitely aided by, we talked about it, kind of a questionable call at the end of regulation. One of Bernard's players called for a 2-minute non-releasable penalty, which led to Pingree being able to essentially hold the ball to end regulation and go into overtime man up. But they made the goal. They did what they had to do. They get to 50-55% at face-off. They have a really good goalie, but Burns is going to be a tough out this year. Even losing these tough games. Burns has a first-year head coach, so obviously they're going through the storming phase of the season. But Logan Stevens is fantastic for them, but Pinger just finds a way, man. They're gonna keep finding a way, and Luke Burns, super super talented in net for them. Jack Sherman, leading the defense. So, and I know. Last week, Coach Webb got his 400th career win in their game against Ridge. So, super happy for him. And, Pingree just chugs along. It's not pretty. I don't think it'll ever be pretty this year, but they won the game. So,
All right, well, that'll do it for our weekly recap. Let's look ahead now to what we have coming up on another crazy action-packed week within our top 20. The first game, Tuesday, Don Bosco takes on Ramapo.
that game is certainly happening. And I think Bosco should be pretty comfortable. We just wanted to mention it because it is a top 20 matchup for us in our poll.
Next game, Nova, I think that I have earmarked as the game that I would want to watch if I was able to with my own two eyes on Tuesday as well. Seton Hall takes on Summit.
Definitely the game of the week. Seton Hall has their little, got to bounce back here and find a way to score on Summit when, everyone is very, very high on Summit and what they're bringing to the table right now. So it'll certainly be a very good test for both these teams as we continue to go through the season here.
Another game that, in the world of quote unquote letdowns or trap games or whatever you want to call them, Del Barton will take on Westfield at Westfield also on Tuesday.
Yeah, I think did Westfield beat them last year, or was it like a super competitive game? Um, yeah, I think that especially knowing what Westfield has at the face-off dot, I think that Barn is a massive massive favorite facing off. But Westfield's riding high right now. They're gonna be feeling good about themselves. Obviously, managing the injury status of Waldman's gonna be big, but it'll be interesting to see how they keep responding after Seton Hall.
Del Barton beat Westfield last year 16-7 on April 24th. So sorry, but you gave me something to do at least there while you were providing your analysis. So that was a positive. We'll stay down the shore on Tuesday in our look ahead as Rumson and CBA square off. That one I think has the makings to be potentially pretty darn good.
I think you're correct on that assessment.
Yeah, I mean CBA has not been tested in state this year, so this will be really interesting for getting a good chance for Rumson to fly back up the rankings.
Rounding out our Tuesday schedule, West Morris and Madison, which has now become a relevant game in the top 20 in the state.
Yeah, I think West Morris has quickly inserted themselves as the top dog in non-public, in Group 2 North. Luke Gauss, I was looking at the stats the other day. He is currently 66 of 68 facing off for Westmore's. He's committed to Maryland. So and Madison, they've been the darlings of the early season. They're 5-0 and chugging along. So I know Madison has a very very strong face-off guy as well. I think Bynum's his name. So that game, just like you said, Keith, became really relevant with the early season success of those two programs.
And we will call that a tease, and you can stay tuned with us to see if West Morris's success allows them to break into the New Jersey Lacrosse Podcast Top 20. As we move on to Wednesday's action, a non-public battle, which would have been a potentially, and I'm not trying to get you going on this, Tharp, but potentially in previous years, a possible preview of the non-public B final, and that would be Gill and Pingree.
Yeah, but that was like 5 years ago. So that's less. Pingree fell out of non-public B, 5 years ago. So not as stung, but we're gonna find out a lot about Gill. What do they got in the tank? Are they gonna? I think Coach Collins is an incredible coach. He's got to coach them through this rough spell. So.
Another big Wednesday game up north, Nova, Mountain Lakes and Bergen Catholic. That's the first of two games for Lakes that are relevant, so I'll just throw them both out to you. Wednesday, Lakes has Bergen, and Saturday, Lakes takes on Chatham. A big week for Coach Flynn up at Mountain Lakes.
Yes, I think the Mountain Lakes Bergen Catholic game probably has the winner staying inside the top 20, and the loser find themselves outside of the top 20 come the rankings next week, because then they both turn around um, on Saturday and play teams that they're supposed to lose to. So one of these teams are going to go should go 0-2. One's going to go 1-1. That's going to certainly, I think, turn the tides a little bit here. So that Wednesday battle is certainly one to keep the eyes on.
And you alluded to it, the other Saturday, or one of the other Saturday games we have our eyes on is that Bergen Catholic Ridgewood game, which I suppose you let us in on your assessment of who the favorite would be in that game, as I think you have Ridgewood a little bit higher.
Yep.
And rounding out our Saturday schedule in our look ahead, Tharpy, Summit, and they will take on Scotch Plains. And is there more magic in the Miceli wand towards the end of this week, Tharp? Tell us, what's going to happen?
I mean, what a week for Summit. They have a really really strong chance to establish themselves as the premier public school team in New Jersey. I think some Scotch Plains is going to be able to test them at the face-off X. I think they're going to be able to match up well defensively. Can they crack the Summit zone? Like Nova said, I 100% agree with the pace of play at which Scotch Plains played against Rumson. I think that you're going to get a little less heat from Summit, but Summit with those poles, they have a really really strong pole group that's going to get on hands and extend, and it's going to be really interesting. I could see that being like 5-4 kind of game, or I could see Summit kind of winning, like an 11-5 kind of, stretching their legs a little bit and, really establishing some dominance there.
All right, as we move into our top 20, I picked out a couple of things that I think are relevant for you. I'm going to take you through our top 20. We're going to start down at the bottom, and I'll give you 20 through 11. Gill remains in the poll at number 20, but they are a precipitous dropper. Previously ranked number 10, they go down to 20. Bergen Catholic drops a spot to number 19. Ramapo also drops a spot to 18. Mountain Lakes up from 19 to 17. Glen Ridge comes in at 16. Bridgewater back in the poll this week at 15. Kingsway at 14. Pingree at 13. Madison moves up a spot to number 12. CBA falls a couple of spots from 9 to 11. And the biggest dropper in the poll this week in terms of where they were to where they have landed, and that is going to be Seton Hall. Drops from number 3 all the way down to number 10. Boys, take us through your decision-making process there to drop Seton Hall that far.
Well, we had... hold on. Well, we had Westfield last week. We had them at 8, right? And then so there you go. You gotta, pretty, when you have all those teams right there that are, pretty much still finding success. You played Delby and Bosco. We played a local game. Augie's won. Summit's fine. Shawnee won their game. Uh, you know, Chatham lost a game to Ridgewood, who we had, just behind, Westfield. So we had to bump them up a little bit there. Where we had, no, sorry, Ridgewood was all the way down at 14. They beat the number 16, so they had to move up. So I mean, it was just more so of more impressive wins from below them, and the teams that were kind of there, found success. So it was tough to all of a sudden, insert them into a slot. I think that of teams that were finding success and finding wins. And then you can't rank them above Westfield when they're right next to each other. So it's kind of where they're at right now.
Yeah, I think CBA falls a little bit just purely based on they don't have the marquee in-state win yet, and then Westfield, Ridgewood all kind of do. Like we said, Pingree, had they did what they had to do, and the win over Bridgewater obviously just looks better by the week. Gill hangs on by the skin of their teeth. I think Glenridge, we don't talk about them much, but they're having a really impressive start to the season.
He was just asking about
Yeah.
Seton.
Oh,
It's all good.
yeah.
Just wanted to talk Seton Hall there, Tharp. There you go. Let's take you through the rest of the top 10. Number 9, Ridgewood breaks into the top 10, as does Westfield. Ridgewood was 14 last week and Westfield 12 last week. They find themselves at number 9 and 8, respectively, this week. Scotch Plains moves up a spot from 8 to 7. Chatham sticks right where it was last week at number 6, despite that loss to Ridgewood. Shawnee moves up from 7 to 5. Summit stays at number 4, and Don Bosco up to number 3 with a strong showing this week against Del Barton despite that loss. And the top 2 remain unchanged. St. Aug's at number 2 and Del Barton still hanging on to the top spot in this week's top 20. We did spend some time earlier talking about West Morris. They fell into the receiving votes category, as did Rumson Fairhaven, and Manasquan dropped out of the top 20. Boys, as we look at those teams that are receiving votes in West Morris and Rumson, kind of where do you feel like they right on the cusp of a top 20, or do you feel like there's a gap between the Bergens and Gill that we have at 19 and 20 this week, between them and teams like West Morris and Rumson?
I think there's even more teams probably in that category than just those two. From Haddonfield, Notre Dame, who we talked about today. I think there's a few teams for sure that are kind of right in that conversation, that could fit anywhere inside probably the 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 range based on how the season is going so far. So we'll definitely keep our eyes on those guys, but they need to get some of those marquee wins and the games that they're supposed to be winning, making sure that they're taking care of businesses. We care about wins here for sure, but when we have to go through rankings, you got to if you're supposed to beat a team by a good margin, we're expecting to see that good margin.
Now, I haven't seen them play yet, but I want to throw a team here. I'm going to defend a team that I haven't seen, and I'm going to ask you, Tharp, to justify why you do not at least throw a vote over here towards Holmdel. I mean, they played your Bridgewater Raritan Panthers very tough early in the season, and then knocked off a ranked Manasquan team in our poll, but still nowhere to be found in the receiving votes category. I think the folks from Holmdel have a little bit of a gripe.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think the biggest thing is, for me, I I ranked Manasquan. I think Manasquan has good individual pieces. Talking to some of the players there, it seems like they're kind of navigating some cultural stuff right now. And I didn't think Manasquan was overly impressive in their first two wins. So, granted, I said this in the group chat. I don't know the last time that Manasquan lost a shore game that wasn't to CBA or Rumson. So I think for me it's just like I don't know how great Manasquan is. So it's like, does beating Manasquan get you in the top 20? I don't know yet. I mean, they still lost to Bridgewater by 7. It wasn't like they lost to Bridgewater by 1. And at the same time, for me, I ranked West Morris because to Nova's point, they're smashing people right now. So they're winning by an average of 8 to 10 goals. And Fear Rumson was 58 seconds away from being ranked. So for me, it's like I try and keep my back end, a little not as many teams just because it is super flexible. So just because I didn't list them doesn't mean I didn't think about it, but it's like at the end of the day, like Bridgewater still tuned them up a little bit. So again, beating Manasquan is impressive, and I think Holmdel's got some pieces, but let's see what team Manasquan ends up being, and but definitely keeping an eye on Holmdel. That's a marquee win for that program for sure.
They have Homedale has Rumson on the 13th. If they beat Rumson on the 13th, they'll win their other two games. They will certainly find a spot in our top 20.
There you go. You heard it here, Homedale people. Let's see what you do against Rumson. Let's get into our picks. Last week, Tharpy, you head-to-head against Gil. You dropped a game in the head-to-head standings. You had a 2-3 week, and Gil went 3-2. You stand at 5-5 on the season, as average as ever, and Gil has a one-game lead at 6-4. Gil obviously is not here, but I do have his picks. And I don't even know if you knew that he was sending them to me, but out of the kindness of my heart, I will select first here in our first game, and that will be Cranford and Randolph. And Gilberto has Randolph taking down Cranford. What say you, Mr. Tharp?
I'm gonna go Cranford. I've been high on Cranford. I think they're due for a win.
Okay. Next game, you get to go first. Montclair and Caldwell.
I'm gonna take Montclair. I think Montclair's playing some good lacrosse right now.
Okay, that you have agreement there. Montclair, Gil's pick over Caldwell. How about Colts Neck and Ocean Township? And I'll go first on that one. Gil has Ocean Township winning against Colts Neck.
I'm gonna take Ocean Township as well. I read in the NJ.com preseason articles that they feel pretty good about their team this year. So go Spartans.
Another look into my hometown here, Lawrence and West Windsor Plainsboro South. Who do you got there, Tharpy?
First off, welcome back varsity lacrosse, Lawrence High. I think they took a year off, had played sub varsity last year, so it's always great when teams are back on the varsity level. That being said, I'm going to go with West Windsor South. I think they have some really strong pieces offensively, so I'm going to go with West Windsor South.
All right, here's an opportunity for you to get back in the standings as Gil is picking Lawrence to beat West Windsor Plainsboro South this week. In the last game in our pick'em, Kinnelon and Jefferson. Gilberto is picking Kinnelon to beat Jefferson.
Yeah, shoot, man. Sometimes I can sway Gil. I'm gonna take Kinnelon too. Kinnelon had a nice win over Voorhees. Head coach for Kinnelon, Tom Mott, is a legend of the game. So I'm gonna ride with the Colts and
Nice.
go Kinnelon.
So two opportunities there for you to pick up a game, Tharp, as you have Cranford over Randolph, and Gil has Randolph there, and you have West Windsor Plainsboro South over Lawrence, and then we have agreement in the three other games. So we'll see how that turns out for next week. And let's move on to our stall warning. We're in the final 2 minutes. We have to keep it in. And the first thing this is going to be at least a little bit of me ridiculing you here for a moment, more than it is our stall warning question. Everybody out there, March Madness is happening. People run a pool, and typically when you enter the pool, the person who's running the pool tells you before the pool starts, hey, this is how much it's going to cost, because we're not taking the house isn't taking a cut here. Nobody's actually gambling. This is like a winner take all situation, and that's how people mostly keep it legal. And Bill Tharp runs a pool, and he gets asked by a couple of different people, possibly at least two people that are on this podcast right now. Hey, Tharp, how much money is your pool going to cost? And Tharp says, I don't know. Haven't thought about it yet. I don't know. Probably $10 maybe. I don't really know. We'll see. And lo and behold, after the Final Four games last night, Bill Tharp finds himself in first place in his pool. with a overwhelming chance to take home the victory in his own pool. And then this morning, first thing out of his mouth in the group chat, hey guys, I settled on $25 a pool in my pool. That's what it's going to cost. Tharp, it's a little shady, bro. It's a little shady.
Listen, this is a family-run pool, and not everyone, we did not discuss it. We did not talk about it. And my brother-in-law texted me this morning. He said, "Hey, he texted our family chat. He said, "Hey, what did we decide on?" And I said, "I truly don't know. I don't care. I won. I feel awkward putting a number out there." So we also do fantasy football, and our fantasy football league is 25. So everyone's like, "Let's just do 25." So that's where that 25 came from. Look, I'm a certified ball knower. It's beyond lacrosse. It goes to NCAA basketball, apparently. I didn't choose this life, Keith. I apologize. I did tell you, I said it might be 10, it might be 25. I truly don't know. Uh, Listen, does me winning the pool and then asking you for money look weird? Yeah. Am I going to
First
take your
off,
$25 all the way to the bank? Yeah. So
can
I
we
apologize.
can we clarify
But
that we're talking about Chips Ahoy cookies here, please? First, okay, 25 Chips Ahoy cookies is what we're talking about, and no, I do not accept your response as legal.
that's
But
fine.
as I said
I
earlier,
was
and
gonna
as I will
listen. I
repeat
gotta
now,
acknowledge you're the runner-up. You finished as runner-up.
I
So
I don't even know how that happens because I don't know anything
I
about
was
any of this stuff.
I was just say
But
you can keep your $25, but now I'm tempted to double down.
you are, as I said earlier, you know
Making up
balls,
rules as they go.
and that too.
Listen. I can acknowledge it's sketchy. I'll say it. It's sketchy. Why didn't we agree on a price earlier? I get it. That's on me. Hand up, man in the arena. I should have been clear with the price earlier. We should have agreed on it. I apologize. Um, you know, I wanted to include you guys. You guys are like family to me, and I apologize for not being clear. So
All
that's
right,
on me.
I
I'll do
accept that
better next year.
apology. Thank you. All right, so our actual store warning question is a bit of an homage both to the holiday that we are celebrating today, for those who do celebrate it, and also a nod to a movie that I think is a little bit underrated, Rise of the Guardians. And I want to know from the two of you, who wins in a fight, the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy, and why?
Great question. I'm going to say if magic is allowed in this fight and it's not a cage fight with no magic, I'm going with the Tooth Fairy. Be able to fly around, use magic, do what you gotta do. But these money lands a shot, it's game over. But I'm gonna go with the Tooth Fairy.
Tharpy?
I got the Easter Bunny. I think it could be on land, it could be in the air, it could jump up. I imagine the Easter Bunny being pretty strong in its hind legs, so getting up in the air. I also pick like I feel like the Easter Bunny like gets to carry eggs with it, so it's got some like projectiles to throw. So I just think that it's gonna be a battle of like size and strength versus speed and agility. But I think give me the Easter Bunny.
Clock, who
My
you
man.
I too cannot get the vision of the crazy Australian Easter Bunny just going ape shit on the Tooth Fairy, and it's just not even going to be a contest. Tooth Fairy flies away, and the Easter Bunny's just pelting her with boomerangs or eggs or whatever projectile that the Easter Bunny has. And I just want to let you know how proud I am that these questions just get dumber and dumber as the season goes on. This is exactly what I was looking
This
for.
is definitely a dumb one.
It is what it is. Boys, that's going to do it for our edition of the New Jersey Lacrosse Podcast for week number 7. I thank you both for your time on this holiday evening, and the same cannot be said for Gil Swenson, who is noticeably absent, but possibly better show. I said it. We'll see.
Yikes.
Boys, happy Easter.
Yikes.
Have a great week, and I'll
Have
talk
a
to
great
you.
Easter, everyone.
Great seeing you guys. Have a good night.
Have a great week.